Hey, what's up? This is Thomas Edward Seymour. I figured I'd do a quick talk about different cameras. Sometimes people ask me, hey, what kind of camera would you buy if you had to buy one right now? That's a really confusing question, right? And even if this thing, probably 6 months from now, everything that I'm telling you is probably going to be totally outdated. And as a matter of fact, there may be stuff I'm saying now that's outdated. But that being said, I'm going to go ahead and give it a go and tell you what I know. First of all, I think what you really want to concentrate on is what are you trying to do with your film? When you're making a feature film, what are you trying to do? If you're trying to sell it to a larger company, then you have to have a certain grade of camera. I mean, the quality of the camera has to be certain quality. That being said, I would say don't buy anything that shoots only standard definition. It's just not worth it. So that's one thing. Some of the standardized format has become 1080p, and if you want to make it look like a film, you usually shoot at 24 frames. So that being said, those are a few very raw, rough statistics. You know, when we were talking about 1080, we're talking about a frame that's 1080 by 1920. This is not. This is smaller. This is probably 480. Anyway, that being said, so when we talk about cameras, it's important to just know what you want to do. For instance, there's some HD cameras out there that shoot, 1080p, but they won't shoot in 24 frames a second. They'll shoot in 30 frames a second. And 30 frames looks more like video. It looks more like documentary or news. It's not going to look like a cinematic film. So that's something to keep in mind. So you want 1080p, and you want it to be you want the ability to shoot at 24 frames. If you're shooting on a camera that shoots on tape, let's say mini DV tape, a lot of the times those cameras won't do slow motion. That's another thing to keep in mind too. If you want to do cool slow motion stuff, you're probably going to want to shoot on some camera with an internal flash drive or P2 cards, or a camera that take SD cards or whatever. There's a lot of different variations in different cameras. So that being said, a lot of the hot cameras right now are the new Canon cameras. So you got the Canon 7D, you got the 5D Mark II, and I think they're coming out with a Mark III very soon, I think in the next 6 months. Those are pretty hot cameras. There's Nikon still cameras that are good, very good as well. The reason why I'm talking about these cameras, they're really interesting. They are still photography cameras that shoot fantastic HD footage. If you think about it, it makes sense. Still cameras have great optics. The lens is good, and now they've recently been able to capture HD footage. They have these big sensors so that you can get perfect stills, and they basically took all that horsepower and technology that they had, and they just ran it at 24 frames or 30 frames a second. So in result, you get great HD footage. And it's kind of ridiculous when you think about this. We've shot some of our films with the Canon XL-H1. That's like this big monster high definition camera, right? And so we bought this thing, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. And at the time, with the lenses and everything, it was about $10,000, right? So fast forward to now, you can go out and buy the Canon 7D. And basically, because the technology is newer, it's shooting in progressive frames versus interlaced frames, which if you don't know what that means, interlaced frames are two fields on top of each other that sort of make up a single frame like this, and a progressive frame is like a perfect still, which is what those still cameras were doing the whole time. So that's something to take cut too. So with the newer technology, basically, in this camera, like let's say you bought the Canon 7D, you'd pay I think $2,000 for the thing, or the 5D Mark II could be like $2,500, $3,000, something like that, with the lens, So you're buying these cameras, and they're actually more powerful than this $10,000 was just a few years ago, and maybe it's always been that like that a little bit, but not this fast. I mean, and you think about this, the only thing really you're losing is the ability to do slow sort of electronic zooms. You have to do manual zooms on the still cameras, which actually is a huge pain in the ass, and very rarely can you pull it off perfectly and smooth. You have to be very, very good. So that being said, a lot of the times you're going to have to do dollies in and dollies out, stuff like that. And most people say, hey, well, a dolly is better. That's fine. There's a reason to use a zoom just like there's a reason to use a dolly. And they're both very valuable. That's all I'll say. And losing that ability to just zoom when you want to, that actually sucks huge. And then also the fact that the inputs on the camera, on the small, like let's say the 7D or the Mark II, it's going to be a smaller input, like an 1/8 inch jack or something like that, versus the more industrial XLR jacks that plug into the side. So you're losing some things, but honestly, if you think about it, nothing that really matters that much, as far as getting a movie done. And if you're talking about saving a significant amount of money, then it's worth just getting these little cameras. Also, Nikon has similar cameras. There's still cameras that shoots HD footage and things like that. The reason why I'm sort of pushing these things is that, typically, like a competitor to the XLH1 would be the HVX, and I think the sequel is the HPX. And they'd be sort of like these $6,000 Panasonic cameras that would shoot on the P2 cards. Well, the P2 cards were expensive. The visual quality on the cameras are astounding, beautiful. True HD. If they're using Zeiss lenses or whatever. I forget what Panasonic actually puts on the front of their cameras as stock lens. But that being said, like, those are great, but those are also, like $6,000, $7,000. So the appeal of the smaller cameras and the cheaper cameras are that they're just much cheaper, and in many cases you're getting equivalent quality, which is mind-blowing. So that's why they're so hot right now. It's a little scary. And I think they used the 7D for things like shooting, and I think in an episode of House they shot with the 7D, and it's going to be used much more. So, and then you have the Red camera, and the Red camera is like a $20,000 camera if you get the whole kit. And it's pretty awesome, and I'd love to have one, but it's really expensive. And this will shoot at like 4K, at like a frame that's huge, like for IMAX, But my question to you is, what are you doing with your film? Because even 1080p will project pretty well in a movie theater. So you really have to ask yourself, what are you trying to do, and is a $20,000 camera overkill? Maybe you rent the $20,000 camera for a couple weeks and shoot your feature, and maybe that costs you a couple grand. But then you're taking into account, well, shit, I could buy the 7D for $2,000. You have to look at the quality difference. The Reds being used to shoot movies like, Book of Eli and all these large Hollywood films. So you have to take into account that too. So, but I guess what I'm saying is that if you need to keep costs down, a camera like the 7D is good. But even more interesting, it's the Canon Rebel T2i. And a lot of my friends at work have been talking about it. And this thing is only like, I think, $800 or something like that. It's insane. And apparently, like, the specs are equivalent. The lens is still a Canon lens on front. It's a plastic body. It's, sort of smaller than the 7D. It's not quite as good or as durable. But apparently, spec-wise, it's equivalent. So you could spend less than $1,000 and shoot an awesome looking movie, and then you're spending less than $1,000. It's kind of insane. Really, it's very frightening. So that being said, I'm going to show you this clip, because the reason why I'm going to show you this clip is just me and a couple friends on the set of Rudyard Kipling's Mark of the Beast, and we're just talking about how we have the Canon XLH1, and how a friend of ours is bringing, I think we refer to it as an HVX, but I think it's actually a HPX. It's the newer Panasonic camera that takes the P2 cards. And we're talking about some of the differences in the specs. This is just us talking very casually about, can we use both cameras on the set? Can we integrate them? How can we use one? Do we shoot two at the same time? Or will it be too different, you won't be able to see? So do we just send a second unit out to get scenes that are different, just forest shots, and isolate the two cameras, or only use one and get rid of the other one? So it's a bunch of different conversations, but I think it's useful because really it's just us BSing on the set, trying to figure stuff out. It's really kind of a cool clip too, because in the background you'll see John Gorman and Sherry Lynn and Tim Kulig, you know, two producers, and John Gorman co-directs with me, and they're all sort of having their conversation in the background too, while we're sort of talking about, you know, cameras and stuff like that. But the bottom line is, right now you could buy a camera very cheap for under $1,000 and shoot a hell of an independent film, you know. And so really, with almost no money, you can do great things. All right. Anyway, it's good talking to you. Enjoy this little clip. All right. Bye.